welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, a place where I interview tech leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, futurists, technologists, thought leaders, and even the occasional celebrity about how they are leveraging technology to transform their business. And today, Mike McCarron is joining me on the podcast. And Mike is a partner at PwC, where he helps C-suite executives in a range of industries drive transformation across all aspects of business operations through IT strategy and governance. And Mike has spent his career advising and supporting leaders as they navigate technology, investments and operations. And prior to PwC, he was CIO at Bain Capital, GE Capital and Fidelity, among a few other companies along the way. So today, we're going to be talking about everything from why so many companies treat technology simply as a series of risks that need to be managed instead of a key driver of corporate strategies, and also his time in the military that he spent in his 20s and how that taught him more about leadership than any other experience. We've got a lot to get through, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Boston, Massachusetts, where Mike is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely, and genuinely appreciate your including me in the discussion today. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I'm from what we would call here in the U.S. the City of Champions. It's Boston, Massachusetts. It's our version of football, baseball, basketball, and hockey. Seem to be some of the best in the country, and I'm happy to be from here because of it. I went to a college called Providence College in Rhode Island on a ROTC scholarship. That's a military scholarship. And then straight to the Army after college for 8 years. I was deployed a lot of different places during those 8 years. I spent a little bit of time in Egypt, a little bit of time in Germany, and some unfortunate time in Bosnia. And then left the Army and went to work for GE during the Jack Welch era. So I was a CIO of a bunch of different businesses across a bunch of industries in GE for about 8 years. Left GE and went to, actually I was in London at the time as the CIO of GE Money, and had an opportunity to join Fidelity as a CIO. So I went to Fidelity in Boston, and that's how I ended up back here at home, and then left Fidelity for Bain Capital. Worked at Bain for 8 years as their CIO for their advisory company, as well as working with all the portcos across the North American and European and Asian portfolios. I joined the other side of the table about 5 years ago with PwC, and I focus now primarily on large-scale tech transformation and IT strategy.
Wow, you've been on quite a journey there. And I'm curious, can you remember if I was to take you way back before all of that, can you remember where your passion for tech came from or something that just lit the spark in you that would put you on this path?
Yeah, a little bit non-traditional. I was not a computer science guy in college. And it really wasn't until I was in the Army that I started getting involved with technology. And frankly, back then, technology wasn't then what it is now. There was no email, there was no internet. But I was a young officer stationed in Egypt.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at NextDiva, helping you engage with your customers and your team
and they sent me a new system to implement.
Now, you might recall NextDiva from episode 1875, where I had a great conversation with Thomas Gorney, NextDiva's co-founder and CEO.
And I was the only support guy, and I was also in charge of the environment that we were living in and the environment the system was going to be in. So I had to figure out how to code.
But Gorney soon built
in COBOL. I had to figure out basic networking back in the 1990s.
And NextDiva brings customer and team conversations into a single screen.
It was done.
So with NextDiva, you'll call, text,
but
chat,
once it was done,
video meet,
the capability was amazing.
But the really special thing is you'll see the entire conversation history all
these far
in a
flung
single
places
frame.
around the world and
So now,
make
when a customer
them
contacts
understand
you,
what was
you'll
needed
know
and
their
then track it
whole story.
from
the
shipment
right
all the way
thing
down to where I was in the Sinai
so
Desert.
Get one
to me was
app
amazing.
to manage your customer and team
that
conversations
kind of exposure to
by simply
technology
visiting
and nextdiva.com/capabilities of technology is what focused me on my role once I left the Army. So it's a lot of the experience that I had that 1 year that I was in the Sinai is what translated into me looking for roles in technology as I left the military. So, and that's really how we got started.
Wow, what an incredibly cool story. And of course, it was that moment and that path that would eventually lead to you becoming a partner at PwC, where you help C-suite executives in a wide range of industries drive transformation across all aspects of business operations through IT strategy and governance, etc. But you can tell me a little bit more about your role and your big focus there.
Sure, and that's right. It really has been an amazing opportunity, and the role has been fantastic. It's not that dissimilar to a lot of the work that I was doing at Bain Capital, helping portfolio companies think through transformation. It was a little bit of a different forced transformation, maybe, as we made investments in these companies. But what I'm doing now is more focused on continuing the M&A process, continuing to help CIOs through the M&A process. But also doing a lot of work around platforming. So what are the right solutions for our companies to think about for the next 20 years? How do we think about that selection process and what's best for our culture of our company? What's best for what we want to be 5-10 years from now? And then a lot of times leading those implementations of those platforms, as well as helping drive larger scale IT strategy discussions and roadmap discussions around where do we go from here. So it's been absolutely a fascinating journey. I get to see lots of different companies and lots of different stages of maturity and how they think about technology, and it's certainly helped develop my perspective.
And I'm curious, from what you're hearing in your conversations with big businesses, and you're working with some big ones all over the world at the moment, why are so many CIOs struggling to make an impact, do you think? And also, why is the turnover in the role so high?
You know, and you could have asked me that same question 20 years ago, and unfortunately, the answer would have been relatively the same. And there are a handful of CIOs and technology leaders that do it great. So I don't want to disparage my peers at all, because I think that there are some folks that are absolutely getting it right. But I think the reason for the turnover, the reason why CIOs struggle is we forget to be business leaders first, where we've got such a bunker mentality because we spent so much time getting beat up for things that go wrong. I've said a couple of things in my career where nobody ever walks into a company and says, "Good Lord, the technology here is fantastic." Generally, all you get is complaints about whatever it is the system is that people are on. And so you spend a lot of time protecting your entrenched solutions, and we get a little parochial about them sometimes, and we don't try to understand where the business needs to go. I mean, a great example of that is back in the 2000s, early 2000s, when the dot-com era came along and everybody was talking about e-commerce. What did businesses do? They went out and hired e-commerce leaders. I thought that was terrible because e-commerce ought to be the purview of the CIO. It was technology, and it was just technology in a different place. And yet they didn't empower their CIOs to go do the work. They hired someone else to do it for them. And the same thing is happening today. You don't see CIOs in most cases, you're not seeing CIOs becoming the digital leaders of the company. The companies are going out and hiring digital leaders rather than entrusting their CIOs to be the leaders of their digital strategy. So I think it's unfortunate the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's the same challenge we had back then is we don't turn our technology leaders, although it's getting better, but we don't turn our technology leaders into great business leaders first, and then who forget they're a business leader, but they can't forget that their first goal is to be a support and service organization. They have to be flawless at being a service organization if they're going to be able to do the type of transformative change and propose the type of things they need to propose to move the company forward. They have to be great because you can't get distracted by whether or not your mobile device management strategy is correct. So being great at the stuff you should be great at gives you the opportunity to drive transformative change. Unfortunately, sometimes we struggle with both.
And I'm curious, you said very often things don't change and things stay the same. Are companies still treating technology and technology solutions simply as a series of risks that need to be managed other than a key lever of a corporate strategy? Is that changing now, or is there still elements of that out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the larger companies, it's still the same. there's lots of new buzzwords with AI and robotics and process automation. There's all types of things happening in the industry, but the underlying technology in these companies is still the same. Obviously, there's a huge push now to the cloud, but a lot of times we're lifting and shifting an environment that already is challenged and putting it somewhere else. And so what does that lead to? The reality is technology is a huge risk. And the bottom line is anytime people touch something, you're going to introduce risk because people are essentially risky. And there will always be risky behavior introduced into your environment. So you have to figure out how to manage that. The problem is that we get distracted because you overly focus on the one thing that you feel comfortable with. Risk is easy to set up a plan around. It's easy to address the concern around risk, spend money, fix the problem, implement a solution. It's much harder to commit to a multi-year expensive journey that transforms a company. So the default is let's go with something that we can control, that's quarter to quarter based, that I can talk about at the end of the year around something I accomplished. Instead of actually addressing kind of a long-term journey that we may not all be here to see the end of.
And something else I wanted to talk to you about, and excited to get you on the podcast today. I was reading or doing a little bit of research on you, and I was reading how you believe that corporate brands should create tech subcommittees. Can you expand on your belief there and why that's so important?
Yeah, sure. It's related to what I was just talking about. At the end of the day, there's a lot on a board agenda. There's a lot of things happening, and only so much time for a board to discuss those things. And so, in areas where there needs to be particular focus, like compensation, there are separate sub boards or subcommittees of boards that meet and discuss those kind of meaty, weighty topics. I would argue that technology, or at least in the paper that I wrote, I argued that technology is in most companies, if not number one or number two, it's certainly in the top five of your expenses, of primarily your SG&A expenses for the company. So if that's true, and you're spending that much money, and we all know where technology is heading, or at least we get a suspicion of where technology is heading, shouldn't there be a group on the board from a shareholder's perspective looking at where that money is being invested? I know we pay the CIO for that, and I know that CIO is beholden to the CEO and to the company to deliver. But that comes with its own set of political issues and challenges. A separate kind of organization sitting on top of all of that, saying and focused on it, with a responsibility to report out to the broader board, I think would move the agenda along a lot faster from a technology perspective, and not have it just focused on a limited discussion around risk and cyber, but have it focused on, are we spending the money in the right place? Are we spending it in the way that it needs to be spent? And you've got to staff that subcommittee with people that understand technology to the extent that it's not just because they got burned by technology in the past and they don't want to let it happen again. So it has to be about, where do we go from here? Are we spending the money in the right place? Unfortunately, you end up with, depending on the role of technology and the strength of the CIO, that discussion doesn't happen. And that's a loss, I think, for companies.
100% with you on that. And also, as we record this, we're reaching the end of the year, and a lot of people are going to be starting thinking about setting goals for 2023, making big changes in life. So for those people listening, can you share any insights on that and how to spend, let's say, the first 100 days in any new job? Because I know this is an area that you're quite passionate about too, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And probably because I've spent so much time, at GE, I was at GE for 10 years, but I switched jobs every 2. And so you get really good, I think, I'm pretty good at moving from role to role and developing certainly a perspective on what works and what doesn't. So my advice would be as deliberate as you possibly can. Make it very clear up front that you are not going to introduce change until you understand the environment. And I know how hard that is in new companies that are looking to you to make decisions quickly, because likely there's a bunch of things that need to be decided. but I'd suggest you be very deliberate. I'd be very clear about what it is you're going to look at, because once you start making those changes, now you own the outcome. You have to take the time up front to do it right. And those 100 days are really important, to take that time and go talk to the business leaders and talk to all your IT folks. There's a great podcast that Michael Lewis does, and he talks about level 6. The level 6 person in your company being really, you have to go down 6 levels to figure out who actually knows what they're talking about. And I think if you can find those level 6 people in those first 100 days and actually get a read on what's going right and what's not, and then talk to the business leaders and understand not just from their perspective, but from the team's perspective that work for them, what is going right and what's not. And then come back and share those findings with everybody, with your IT team, with the executive committee, with the company, if they allow you to. Your assessment is if you're coming in to audit technology of it, and then what are you going to do for the next couple of years to address the things that need to be addressed and celebrate the things that are going well. And so I again, that's a lot of words, but at the end of the day, I'm saying be as deliberate as you possibly can, and do not feel like you have to hit the ground and start making changes in those first 100 days until you understand the situation that you're in.
Such wise words there. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Nextiva, helping you engage with your customers and your team in a single app. Now, you might recall Nextiva from episode 1875, where I had a great conversation with Thomas Gorney, Nextiva's co-founder and CEO. Now, Thomas shared how he came to America as a Polish immigrant and college dropout who didn't speak a word of English. But Gorney soon built several market-defining companies before starting Nextiva. And Nextiva brings customer and team conversations into a single screen. So with Nextiva, you'll call, text, chat, video meet, and more. But the really special thing is you'll see the entire conversation history all in a single thread. So now, when a customer contacts you, you'll know their whole story. You can say the right thing right now. So get one app to manage your customer and team conversations by simply visiting nextiva.com/techtalkdaily. When we began this podcast today talking about your origin story and the time you spent in the military, and something else I read about you was that the 2 years you spent in the military actually taught you more about leadership than any other experience in your life. So can you expand on that story too?
Yeah, it was actually 8 years in the military, but the first 2 years were the most impactful. And a lot of it was because, and I think you're referring to an article that I wrote about leadership around some of the challenges that I faced being kind of a shiny new second lieutenant coming out of a New England environment and being plopped down there in Germany with a battalion that had just come back from the war. And, I think that it taught me a tremendous amount about both myself and about leadership. It's being a leader isn't just about giving direction and making decisions. It's about empathy. It's about humility. I was beaten up and questioned and at every turn for those 2 years. And I fortunately had extraordinary leaders around me and people that supported me throughout that process. So I learned from my platoon sergeant about empathy and humility. I learned from my company commander about the importance of setting an example and the importance of understanding that sometimes you're going to make mistakes and you should be corrected for those mistakes, but it shouldn't be the end of you. And I learned from the people around me how important it is to put great people wherever you are around you, because you can't do it on your own. And you have to trust those people. In the Army, you trust them with your life, but you have to trust those people to tell you what's right and what's wrong. And you have to put the people around you who aren't afraid to tell you that you're wrong. Because if you just put the people around you that tell you that you're right, even though that feels good, you're not really ever going to be right. So, I learned so much those first 2 years, but the thing that shines kind of brightest is certainly the people that where I was lucky enough to be surrounded with, and those lessons that I learned from those folks I took with me for my entire career now.
And what's next for you? Where do you go from here? What's your big focus going to be next year? I appreciate you probably can't share too much, but is there anything you can?
Dana, this is the great thing about my job is I don't really know what's next.
Yeah.
I know for sure it's going to be challenging. I know that nothing in you're paying a consultant to do work for you. You have a very high bar of expectation of delivery, and I know that that whatever I'm asked to do next and going into next year is going to be challenging. It's going to be fascinating and interesting, and I'm hopefully going to have the support and the willingness of great CIOs and great organizations to continue to deliver the things I've been doing over the past couple of years. Longer term, I've had the opportunity to give back a little bit. I don't know if it's really giving back, because I essentially was still being paid, but I've done some public service stuff. I've done some political technology stuff that I really enjoyed. So I think longer term, I'd love to figure out how to do more kind of public service as I go forward. But again, I'm not sure where next year takes me, but I am sure it's going to be fun.
Now, you've spent a lot of time with me today sharing your insights. I'm going to ask you to leave us with a few other things here, some quick fire questions. First of all, is there a book that you could leave us to add to our Amazon wish list, or a song for our Spotify playlist? All I ask is what you're going to leave us with, and what is the story behind that choice?
Yeah, sure. So as far as books or a book goes, I'm fascinated by biographies or autobiographies of great people. How they went from, in most cases, meager beginnings to being people that shaped the world. And I just finished actually listening to, not reading, but listening to Eisenhower in War and Peace, and the impact that he had on World War II and then as president of the United States. It's an amazing story. But a while ago, I read a book that Colin Powell wrote called It Worked for Me in Life and Leadership. And I actually give that book to prospective leaders that have worked for me in the past, because he talks about the things that he thinks leaders ought to have, qualities that he expects to see in his leaders. And he talks a lot about leadership and why it's hard. And I think it's a really great practical view of what it takes to be a great leader. And so like I said, I give that book to folks that work for me. In terms of songs, I'm unfortunately an unabashed country fan. Kenny Chesney's has been my favorite for a while, and there's a song that he sings called "The Life," where essentially the song it's not about what we acquire or how much we have; it's about how happy we are. And he sings it about a gentleman in the song. His name's Jose, and Jose is just happy to fish every day and laugh at the bar at the end of the day with his friends and go home to his wife. And I like the simplicity of that, because obviously world in general is chaotic. And I think as much as you can simplify and find what makes you happy, that's what's most important to me.
100%, man. I'm going to be checking that song out for sure, and I'll get the book added to the Amazon wish list too. And I'm not the kind of guy to take. So you've invested a lot of time with me today, shared your insights, left us with a song, left us with a book. Let's see if we can do something for you. Now, some of the biggest names in business and tech have either been guests or listened to this podcast. So if there's one person you'd love to have a private breakfast or lunch with, who would that be and why?
Yeah, it's. I think the way that people think about technology, in particular, how investors, and I was fortunate enough to work for Bain Capital for those 8 years, and the smartest people in the world who are making those decisions about investing. It always fascinated me how they think about what can be or can't be successful. And the one person who's been tremendously successful at it for a very long time is Peter Thiel. And I would love to sit and talk to him and just figure out how his brain works. How did you think about making the investment in Facebook or PayPal or LinkedIn or all the other investments that he's made that have been phenomenally successful? How did he see it back before it became what it is today? And I'd love to spend time understanding better why he thinks how he thought about things that way.
What a great answer. Now, I will send that out into the universe, into the ether. Let's see if we can manifest a meeting there. Just promise me.
I'm available anytime, anywhere.
And for anyone listening that just wants to find out more information about everything we've talked about at PwC or connect with you or your team, what's the best starting point for everything?
So LinkedIn, I'm Mike, Mike C. McCarron at LinkedIn. And that's I watched The Social Dilemma years ago now, and much to the chagrin of my family, I'm off most of social media with the exception of LinkedIn. So really, LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me.
Oh, I love it. Well, I'll get those links added to the show notes so people can find you nice and easily. Love listening to your story today, the lessons you learned in the military, how it's served you well to this day, and also talking about why so many companies are treating technology simply as a series of risks to be managed rather than that key level of corporate strategy. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing all that with me today, and hopefully get to speak with you again soon in the future.
Really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you today, and I hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
What a great guy. I love chatting with Mike today, and I think we covered so much in a short amount of time. And because we covered so many different areas, I'm curious, did anything resonate with you listening? Maybe you've got something you want to add to the conversation. Today's episode is not just about me and Mike, it's about you. You're listening out there, and maybe you've got something you want to add to this conversation. And you can do that in a number of ways. You can email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, slide into the DMs on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes. And whether it be a question or maybe you want to come on the podcast and sit with me here and we'll talk about the topic in more detail. Whatever it is, just let me know. But tomorrow I've already got another great guest lined up, and it's a completely different industry to this one, but it's all about how technology is transforming our world. So hopefully you will. So I cordially invite you to join me again, but a big thank you for listening today. And until next time, don't be a stranger.